Good afternoon. This is Julia Widup with Seeker's Journey TV, and we have with us this afternoon Jim Sharon, who is the founder of the Whole Man Expo in Denver and the author of Ordinary Men, Extraordinary Lives. So tell us a little bit about your book and your expo, Jim.
Well, great. The book was actually published in September of 2011, and this was a year-long project that involves 40 men and their diverse stories. They're actually courageous stories, very transparent stories, and they feature surmounting adversity and major challenges in people's lives. So virtually all of the stories have to do with growing experiences that shape the men's lives. And when I worked with the authors, put them through an orientation period and developed the stories, edited the stories, I asked them, or actually told them, that we're going to be doing something besides this book to really evolve men and to redignify men, because men really very much needed that. And I said, it's going to evolve organically. And sure enough, several months later, I had the idea of creating an expo here in Denver that I'd like to bring forth in other parts of the country or even in the world. And that first expo was held last September in southeast Denver. We're going to be doing one on the Denver University campus this year.
Wonderful. And what date will that be?
It's Saturday, September 8th. It's all day from 9 in the morning till 6 p.m. And I'll mention something about the purpose. Okay, so there's two main purposes. One of them is to gather men who've been networking quite a bit with one another already, have done a lot of men's work, men's groups, so they're striving towards their own life balance, and to bring them together for a learning experience with 13 major presenters. These are people who have had national and international reputations as speakers. We'll have vendors and sponsors in the background. And the other purpose is, and this is a very one that's dear to my heart, and that is to educate the public at large about contemporary issues that men are facing, the challenges that are going on in today's world.
Mm-hmm. Great. And do you have a website? Yeah. I
do. The website is http://mensanthology.com. Now, anthology is spelled ANTHOLOGY, so mensanthology.com. And then you'll see on that site some information about the book, blogs that I do on a weekly basis, previously twice a week, and then also a Whole Man Expo tab.
Okay, great. And okay, so tell us about the book. That was the stories of these guys' stories?
Correct. There are, as I said, 40 diverse stories, so we have many different sections in this book. Sections like fatherhood. There's a lot of stories about people's experiences growing up with fathers, often difficult fathers. I'll give you an excerpt of one of those. Stories on healing, adventure, spirituality, divorce, reform or activism, healing. I don't know if I mentioned that one. Okay. So we have 9 different sections.
Okay. Well, I'd like to hear that excerpt.
All right. This is actually the lead story, so it was easy to pick one. And I'm going to pick one that I think is quite compelling, which is characteristic of a lot of the stories. We have a tremendous amount of very strong content. So I'm going to just jump in here. I said, and this is Steve speaking to his dad, after his parents were separated and he's living with his dad for 2 months. Mom isn't coming back until you quit drinking. And Dad replied, I want to make you a promise. You will never see me drink again. Quite surprised, I said, you promise? He repeated, I promise. As we pulled up to Mom's house, Dad leaned over, hugged and kissed me, and told me he loved me. At that moment, I felt hope in my heart that our family would be restored. So I'm going to skip a little bit and just read one more sentence or two. we immediately informed Mom, who, he had come home and he couldn't find his dad. So he was looking around, and he looks into the garage, and he'd committed suicide by way of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Oh, my
so
God.
Indeed, yes, he never saw him drink again, did he? He promised.
Oh, my
That's
God.
not the result he expected. Steve went on to become a multimillionaire businessman, a football player with the Seattle Seahawks back in the 60s, and he's now working a lot as a football coach. I was going to say a lot to support men in different capacities. Boys as a football coach for high school. He goes to prisons. He does work in churches, so that people don't have to repeat his experience, and people who are at risk can be mentored as he was.
Yeah.
So that's one typical story.
Typical.
So the stories in the book, okay?
Yes. Oh, that poor kid. Wow.
Yeah, but the point is, you see where he evolved too.
Yes.
And he speaks all over the country now.
Yeah, he did complete his hero's journey and become a hero, I'm sure, to all those people he's mentoring.
Exactly. So I have my own story in the book, and I was prepared to tell you a little bit about that. As I said, there's quite a variety.
I'd like to hear your story.
All right. What point should I jump in? I mean, do you want to hear a little bit about my background?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of give you some brushstrokes, all right?
Okay.
So we don't take too long in the interview. As I was growing up, and we moved around to a lot of different cities, so I got a lot of different experience in big cities. My dad worked for the federal government and kind of went up the ladder. I was a very good child. I was very compliant, good student, a child that my family could be very proud of. So I kind of was a late rebeller, right? And I did my rebellion in graduate school. It was basically becoming very involved in humanistic psychology and body-mind integration and spirituality and things that my parents kind of scratched their head about and said, what are you talking about? With these different things. I was an entrepreneur early on, and I wasn't too conventional. So backing up just a little bit, something that was there were two stark experiences that kind of paved the way for my story. One of those was in the 1969 Washington moratorium during the Vietnam War era. I happened to be one of about 300,000 people in the crowd and was very impressed, was really struck by the sense of communal spirit. People were sharing food, sharing common belief systems. It was a very, very strong time. And that made an impact on me, which kind of went dormant for quite a while. And then when I was moving from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to a second mental health center that I was working in Norfolk, Virginia, one of the move men had a rather striking appearance. A T-shirt, it was kind of a tank top T-shirt, no shoes, no shoes or socks, just shorts, and he was very different than the other move men. Well, he was a hitchhiker that they picked up. He had sold all of his, he gave away everything, all of his possessions, and he had a lot of possessions from corporate life, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he gave away everything except that he sold his library books. So he was traveling on faith through the country. We were so fascinated by him, we had him stop over to stay the night, and we were interviewing him, as you are me. Mm-hmm. And I had this thought various times during our conversation that I don't know if I'd ever have the guts to do what he did. Well, my story begins with basically that kind of scenario. Years later, having gotten my doctorate degree, working towards licensure as a psychologist, there were a set of experiences that set me up with a spiritual community. And a year into the life of this community, I am waking up in the woods in Mount Shasta, California, having given away many of my possessions, sold many of them. We were renting out our house, so we didn't do that. We didn't give away the whole farm. Okay. But I had burned the bridges with family and friends who thought I was going way off the deep end, and I probably did. You know,
sounds like.
I'm in this woods, refusing to continue to play the games that were involved in this spiritual community. I thought there was a lot of gamesmanship at that point. It wasn't supporting me, as was happening early on. I was getting a lot of training in what was called freedom, right? And it was basically undoing ourselves. You know, not learning to stand on nothing is what the teacher called it. And this was one of those charismatic teachers, typical of cults in those days. But cults aren't just black or white. There's a lot of value to them. And when I was getting a lot of learning, until I said, this is getting too destabilizing. I'm tired of playing these games. So I was dismissed. My wife stayed. My daughter was with her. She had the car. So there I am waking up in the woods. And basically I said, how am I getting out of these woods? And even if I do, where am I going? You know, I had given away, all I had is $16 and a backpack with some clothes. So the story evolves from there. It was actually, as I said in the book, a silent belly laugh, because I realized, you know what? You really did it, didn't you? You gave it all up. And somehow, you have done that, or you've heard that?
I've done it.
You've done that, so you know what I'm talking about. So the next 6 weeks, basically, I did get out of the woods. I won't go into those details. There was one other straggler left behind that gave me a ride out of there into San Francisco. I lived homelessly for the next 10 weeks. And so I'd wake up most mornings going, where am I going to live today? I did get about a 3-week stretch where I did live with somebody in a very filthy apartment. So I was panhandling, and here's a guy with a doctorate degree, right, ready to become a psychologist, and I'm having a little bit more of a freedom challenge than I expected. But it taught me a lot about my own resilience, taught me a lot about faith. And as it ended, I left that group, worked with somebody here in Denver to help me really sort out all this. He was kind of a culty programmer. It didn't take too much to deprogram because I'd already, realized I'm out of here. Yeah, I'm out of here. And I talked to some experts in San Francisco anyway and gotten quite clear about things. So then I went on to develop my career. Got licensed as a psychologist. And I'm trying to, again, get a sense of the timing of this. Yeah, I was licensed as a psychologist in 1989. And just a couple of years later, a year after my dad died, I met up with somebody else who originally I didn't like at all. But as it turned out, I met him again a couple of years later, and he seemed to me to be totally transformed. I was fascinated by his own story, but skeptical, because I'd already felt like I'd been burned by somebody in a pretty unsavory group, even though I learned a lot.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to trust this guy. Excuse me, I need to scratch my nose.
I know, I hate that. In the middle of these, everything starts itching.
Exactly, yes.
I'm curious what happened to your wife and child. Did they ever leave?
Yes. Working with the culty program that I mentioned, he kind of helped me to intervene and to do an intervention with her cousin, who's also a psychologist. And I met up with her. It was a little surprise to her when she came east to see her family. And we sat together for a couple of days with this cousin of hers and got her to agree to, even though she was skeptical about returning with me because she was still entrenched in the group, she agreed to leave and join me in Denver. And it was a little bit harder for her to make the adjustment, but within about a month she She did, and we're still married here, almost 42 years. Yeah.
Fabulous.
So right, and we now ended up having 2 more children. The daughter has some rough memories of that time. It wasn't easy for her. She didn't quite understand what was going on, which is quite understandable.
Yeah.
So that's a good question on your part. I've been, obviously, because of our time constraints, leaving some things out.
Yeah.
So I ended up joining this other group that was yogic at the time, but it became a Sufi community. That's too long a story, but an absolutely fascinating one. This one had a lot more spiritual foundation to it. And I was with them for about over 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you know about Sufism, but it's a mystical tradition. This group has actually continued to do wonderful things, not only in their headquarters of Carbondale, Illinois, and they're very well respected in the community. They have a lot of businesses they run, farms, so tremendous training for people in a variety of skill sets.
Okay.
But they also operate internationally. In Germany, Bangladesh, they have a huge presence, and they're helping there to build orphanages, and they're teaching people a lot about modern day farm systems, and doing tremendous work, service work in the world. The basic deal was, in a nutshell, that I've always had this longing. It was pretty quiet most of my life, but it was there. I recognized it at the tender age of 6 for what is sacredness. A longing to be close to the divine. So this mystical sense that was dormant until it was developed along the way through some painful experiences and difficult experiences, but definitely did get developed in both of these communities, and especially the Sufi one. And yet, alongside of that, there was this sense of wanting autonomy and independence, and hence my entrepreneurship as a professional.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt the teacher, as good as he was, and he was very good, and the community was amazing. I learned something about surrender. I learned something about yielding. We did a lot of rigorous practices, but I felt like I was getting too confined and too isolated. This is a common experience with people in spiritual groups, in intensive groups. I finally had to pull the plug on that one as well. It was a difficult choice because I was getting so much value and there was so much that was beautiful about it. But I said, I've got to go. And that didn't make the community real happy because they felt like I was being disloyal to them after all these years. But it made me happy, and I never looked back. I never looked over my shoulder and regretted that decision, although I have missed a lot about those interactions.
Yeah.
So these days, I've been in private practice alone for 34 years. When I say alone, I mean I've also done other work, mental health center work. I work alongside of my wife, who's a licensed professional counselor. We do marriage work together, seminars in that area. I've written this book, as I said, was published in September. We're doing our second Expo this September 8th at the Cable Center in Denver. And I've been doing workshops at least one a month by the title, Growing from Defining Moments. So events that shape people's lives. And I lead them through a process so that they can get in touch with not only their past memories, but to see this, revisit them in the moment. And they get a whole different sense. Yeah, there's some different learnings that they glean when they look into the moment. And then bring that into future vision. And people often get a strong sense of their life purpose from this kind of an experience.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. Well, I'm looking forward to the Expo and to reading your book. Do you want to tell the viewers again where they can pick that book up?
You can get it at Amazon.com under the title Ordinary Men, Extraordinary Lives, Defining Moments. If you're wanting a number of copies, a volume discount, you can contact me directly at Doc Jim Sharon, and that's SHARON, at yahoo.com.
Okay.
The website is http mensanthology.com, and you'll see tabs there for the book, different tabs on the book itself, reviews of the book, about the book, blogs, and then also Whole Man Expo.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for being with us, Jim.
It was very much a pleasure. And it's always interesting to do snippets on my whole life story. Thanks for your listening, Julia. It was a pleasure meeting you over the wire.
Yes.